Okay, guys, welcome to chapter 3, presentation for chapter 3. As previously indicated, very few of you have actually looked at the presentation, so hopefully you'll look at the presentation after I finish with it. But some housekeeping stuff first. Um, how are we in terms of preparation for next week's presentations? I know presentation 1 is fairly, you all seem to be okay with that. Miss Hamilton, how are we looking with presentation 2, understanding others? Because I think you're the only person here from your group. Miss Hamilton. Ms. Buchan has joined. Welcome, Alicia. Alicia, sorry, not Alicia.
Good day, sir.
Hi. Uh, Yakiba, no comment on preparations. All right. Now, one of the problems that we're gonna have is because we're presenting chapters, everything's presented in a sequential manner. So it's going to be problematic for any group to skip a presentation because it impacts upon a following presentation. So kind of have to do it in order. So if anybody or any group doesn't present, kind of holds back the rest of the class. So let me know if there are problems and might have to reschedule certain things, but we can at least get presentation 1 done, and that will start things, of course. All right. Hopefully, everybody gets that. Okay, so let's look at chapter 3. Um, all right, everybody seeing this?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, so in chapter 3, what we're going to be doing here in chapter 3 is that we're going to be looking at specifically the the relational leadership model, which we'll start to call RLM model, and present it to you so that you could look at it as a potentially a system that you could look at for developing your own leadership philosophy, which is the objective of the course. So let's start to look at the model. It starts again by looking at sort of like the groundwork that the model sits on, which is leadership is not only about the individual, but the individual and their relationship with others. And that relationship is critical to the nature of how your leadership will run or be will work. Without that relationship, you're going to have problems with it. All right, and this model really sits on understanding that whole concept of developing good relationships with others to be able to get into it. Right, somebody's here. Hi, Nadia. All right, so we're talking about the relationship. So you see this quotation here. Leadership is always dependent on the context, but the context is established by the relationships we value. So, given the context that you're working in, it is shaped. It is shaped by the relationships that you have within that organization, be it within your family or with friends in a classroom situation, at work, as a superior or as a manager yourself. Those are the things that the relationship will define the nature of the leadership that you will project, um, though taking into consideration the context in which you're going to be doing certain things. All right, so this is just a reminder of the definition. It's a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. This is just a reminder of the definition that we have. Um, So the RLM model will focus on 5 primary components. Um, the RLM is purposeful and builds commitment towards positive purposes that are inclusive of people and diverse points of view, empowers those involved, is ethical, and recognizes that all 4 of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. So the areas that we have underlined there would be the areas that we'll be examining in more detail, because those are the elements that they're going to be looking at in terms of developing the model around the purpose of function of your leadership or the organization, the inclusive nature of the way in which you lead, the way in which you empower individuals within your organization or within your structure, the value system or the ethics that you utilize to generate and inculcate your relationships, and understanding that all of this is going to be process oriented. So it's always going to be about doing things over and over again with the purpose of being able to achieve your goals, but at the same time to develop those meaningful relationships in your models. So they try to use a little visual outlay here of the process of it being inclusive, empowering purpose, and there's sort of like a Venn diagram model that they try to utilize here, where purpose is at the central point, overlapping with your inclusive behavior, the empowerment that you develop, and of course your ethical value system that guides and sort of like overrides everything that's going on within the whole process oriented model that they're looking at. So the model itself doesn't seek to describe new ways of leadership. It's really about the designing an aspirational model, as they use here, aspirational models to develop effective groups and effective leadership within your organization. Remember, again, the whole situation about leadership is about followership. So the combination of the two is what's going to be important for you to be looking at in terms of developing. There are 5 key elements that they identified that would serve to develop the program. And let's look at these. Um, purpose influence. Purpose influences the component. So the first element that they're looking at in terms of the key elements would be purpose. So the purpose will influence what we do. So if you're in an organization, and obviously organizations have goals and objectives, but the purpose has to be set up in such a way, or your organization has to be set up in such a way that you are being inclusive of other people and other points of view. In order to accomplish that purpose, you have to empower the people that you have in the organization with you. And you have to be guided by ethical values that you would be consistent and congruent with across the board for everybody. It includes others, empowers them to use their own leadership and talents, is ethical in that it benefits others and improves the quality of life. How that purpose is achieved is just as important as the outcome. It is vision driven and not position driven. So you don't drive an organization through only your vision. Well, you don't drive it because you say so, because you're in charge. It's not position driven. So because you might be the leader in the organization, it doesn't mean that you're driving that purpose from your your authority as the owner or leader in the organization, but it's one that's going to be vision driven, where you're going to share that vision with others and get people to contribute towards developing that vision with you. Because, of course, you might have a vision, but you can't get it done without other people working together with you to get it done. That makes sense? Yeah. All right, individuals in the leadership process need to know themselves. So this comes back to the first chapter that is going to be presented on, which is getting to know yourself, understanding self before you can effectively work with others. So getting to know yourself and getting to know others is going to be a very important part. We already met the whole process of engagement, which is knowing, being, and doing. So process calls for those engaged in it to be knowledgeable, which is knowing, be aware of self and others, being, and to act, the doing element. So those will tie back to that bit of the model that we looked at before. All right. So these three concepts are interrelated. The knowledge you possess influences your ways of thinking, which then for influences your actions, and your beliefs and ways of existing in this world influence your actions, which therefore influence your behavior. So again, it's circular in nature. That's what they're talking about, and therefore it's not a circular path that we're going to be taking, because it's one thing impacts the other. That thing swings back around and impacts you again, and that keeps on cycling through until you hopefully develop a greater awareness of yourself and what you're doing. So it's not going to be a straight or even a winding path, but a more circular type of development that goes on with the knowing, being, doing element. So knowing, being, doing, the doing will show you, okay, if you have gaps, if there are issues, then you go back, re-examine yourself, you start to change certain things, you get to know yourself better. Then the being element picks up where you are compensating for the the issues that you might have developed or identified, and therefore started to do in a different manner. Um, I don't know if you all can understand that. That's sort of like when you first start, again, it's a whole point of view. When you first start dealing with leadership positions, especially if you're kind of green with it or you've never gotten involved with it, you might have certain personality traits that you didn't realize impacts upon what you're doing. So you might find yourself being very what's the word I want to use, hard and fast with how you believe things ought to be done. But because you're working with other people who may have different perception and um, processes in minds and even better knowledge than you, then you might find that there's a different way to get certain things done. So therefore, what you've learned about yourself is that you need to be a little more open to other people's points of view. So that's the doing part. So you realize, okay, I've been doing this wrong, or I can do this better. And that therefore opens up your knowing of yourself, because then you start to realize there's some sort of self realization that I'm possibly being a little too pig-headed, to say it mildly, to relax and let other people have a point of view and say things, and then that knowing leads to doing, and that doing leads well being, sorry, and that being leads to doing, and then hopefully that you've improved, and that pattern, that circular pattern spirals outwards with greater awareness, and you improve what you're doing in the second round or the third round of what you're doing. The problem is that if we don't engage in reflection, then we're not going to see that. And if we don't listen effectively to people or allow other people to have alternative points of view than you, then that creates the problem as well. So again, it starts with being humble and understanding that you can never know everything. That's the first thing you have to be doing there with that. All right. Palmer uses the phrase head, heart, and practice. So to describe the paradoxes in teaching and what happens when we keep the head, knowing and intellect separate from the heart, the being, and even further separated from the practice of doing. So they all have to work together. The knowledge, your emotional, and your spirit aspect of yourself has to be connected with the practice of what you're doing. So you can't achieve things if these elements in the process are disconnected from each other. They need to be working together, as they say here. You use that there's a need for synthesis of all three components in the teaching process, and the same applies to leadership. Now, this is something that he utilized from the teaching or education background. So he's using that experience of in teaching, what you know and how you are as an individual, which is, your personality, your character, that type of stuff, your value systems, would impact upon your practice as a teacher. And if you don't make the connection between the three and willing to listen and learn from other people in so doing, then you're gonna have problems. And it's necessary for you to have connection between all. I mean, most teachers that you've probably come across have the knowledge element down. They know their stuff, but they may know their stuff, but they may not know enough about how to teach, and that's a gap that they have to recognize. And that gap in um, in knowing how to teach, because I mean, even when you do teacher training, it doesn't mean that you've learned everything. You have to start to put things into practice, and in the practice, you need to reflect, because it means that there's more to learn to be able to understand better. And you have to be humble enough to understand that you don't know everything. I remember one time when I was first started teaching, I remember one teacher telling me that she preferred to lie to her class if she didn't know something, because she was so afraid of looking, um, well, the phrase she uses, she doesn't want to look stupid in front of her students. And I remember chatting with another lecturer, of much more experience, and that lecturer turned out to be my father. And he said to me, "Don't ever lie to students." That was very poor advice that he said that teacher gave to me, who had more experience than me at that time. He said, "The reason why is because you're likely to cause more damage by lying to somebody in a classroom circumstance, and it will take you far longer to correct that damage than it would be to just say at the beginning, 'I don't know, give me some time, let me go and check on it.'" And in fact, what he pointed out to me, he said, I mean, you have to respect the fact that you yourself have limitations, and that those limitations will show themselves quickly in a classroom, because you don't know everything, and especially when you're first going in. And I found that his advice is probably the best advice I ever got. And, it was something that I utilized to help guide me with my practice. And of course, when I started to do more studies and that type of stuff with it, it helped. It made sense. And what he was saying from his own practical experience was correct. Lying to students, and students know it. I'm sure you are familiar with lecturers who have lied to you in the past, or teachers that might have lied to you in the past, and that was problematic for you guys. Any experience with that? Or
No,
how would you
no.
feel if a teacher told you, "I don't know"?
Well, in some sense, it would kind of make me feel a little bit closer to the teacher because it's not just that I don't know, but even the teacher doesn't know. So
Right.
it's something that both of us could now go and research to find out. But I don't have any particular experience in the area, but I would imagine that you would look even more dotish if somebody were to call you up on the lie that you said.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Because eventually it comes up.
Yeah, like if
Those
somebody
things will hide
did
themselves.
know the
That's correct.
answer and they said, "No, miss, this X, Y, and Z had happened." And then she would just, hang down her head and change the chapter. Like,
No,
yeah,
I've
no.
seen some teachers double down on it and say, "I never said anything like that." Okay, you see, when you get caught in a lie, how you treat with being caught in that lie is really going to be, and it's going to reflect a lot about your value system. Because if you're willing to lie to your class, I mean, what else you willing to lie about? You understand? Because it's such a small thing, and it's the small things that tell the most about you as an individual and a character. So those are things that you want to be looking at. So if you think about it from a position of leadership, if a leader is lacking some technical expertise and they don't want to admit that to the people that they have working with them or working around them, then and they begin to lie, then that creates that distrust, because now we can't trust you. I mean, you'd have to do a lot more to bring um, to bring s- to bring people back to trust you. I remember having a personal experience like that. I remember doing some work with a class, and I had made mistakes in doing the work, and I realized that it took me one day to teach, or one session really, to teach that topic. And when I realized I made the mistake, I went back to the class and said, "Listen, I made a mistake, so we have to undo what I did." What took me one session to teach the wrong way took me about 5 sessions to fix afterwards, because of the mindset I had to recreate and make sure everybody kind of got the idea that, listen, I made a mistake. This is what we should have been doing. And it was a mathematical process that we were looking at in statistics, which had caused that problem. And I remember learning a huge lesson from that. If I'm not sure about something, but then I was sure that this was the methodology, but then the methodology I was using was incorrect for the application that I was looking at. So it was really had to take my time and reteach the topic to the way in which it was required for that application, and that took a long while to correct. So it's really hard. So get it right the first time, and then you sort of don't have to worry about that in the future. So if you don't know, don't do, kind of thing like that. All right. So people who collaborate with those who are credible, well, sorry, not people will collaborate with those people. And this is what we were just talking about. If you are willing to work with somebody who would admit to you that they don't know, or they know this much and that's it, um, because they will believe you, and then they will be able to work with you. But there is, of course, a certain amount of competence that a leader has to show when it comes to. It means that leaders have to put in more work to display what we call responsible knowledge. So if you're going into some new area of activity and you don't know enough, you have to go and do more work beyond what you expect your your employees or your followers to know. So this makes a lot of sense. So it takes time to develop your competence. So that's one of the reasons why, in terms of management and businesses, that's why we look at people with master's degrees and that kind of stuff and years of experience, because we're hoping that is able to develop your competence. The same thing with teachers. Teachers come into a system and they have to demonstrate competence, but it takes time to develop that competence, and they have to do more and more work. So as a teacher, when you first start, that's probably going to be your highest, the greatest amount of work that you have to do is at the very start. And then afterwards, what you're doing is you're topping up, you're learning new things, new ways of doing it. So the hardest time to be a teacher is when you first begin, and then afterwards it sort of gets on an even keel. But it doesn't mean that the learning stops. Anybody in class here teachers? No teachers here? I mean, if you're a parent, you're teaching, so
I teach and tutor sometimes to pass the time, even though I'm in advertising.
uh-huh. And that means you have to show what we call responsible knowledge, right? You understand that concept?
Yes, I understand that concept, but you also have to have a whole set of patience as well.
Oh yeah, well, we're not talking about the actual act of teaching just yet, but the patience element you're going to have to be dealing with. That actually has to do with some of the elements of teaching and practice we'll look at. All right. So there are 4 levels of skill that are essential to leadership. Interpersonal skills, which really speaks to your communication. Conceptual skills, the ability to think creatively. Technical skills, those expertise that you require, that technical knowledge. And then tactical skills, your ability to negotiate, develop good human relations, and the other skills that you require to achieve the objectives, bargaining and those kind of things. Knowing is an ongoing process that allows you to be able to continue to develop, learn, and grow. So that these skills are essential, but you knowing that your capacity in each one of these 4 skill levels is going to be something that you need to be taking into to so let's say, for instance, Your interpersonal skills, which is your communication skills between people, is lacking, because we have a lot of people like that in organizations. They're very good at conceptualizing things. They're very good at technical skills. Their tactical skills and interpersonal skills tend to be linked. So therefore, they may be suffering in those areas, and therefore require you as an individual to understand and evaluate yourself to see where your gaps are, so that you can make necessary changes. So you have to be continuously developing and learning and growing. Okay, that makes sense? All right, the being aspect means knowing what the values and attributes define you as a leader. Your character helps you know what is right. More than that, it links that knowledge to action. So if you know what is right, then you know what you have to do. Character gives you the courage to do what is right, regardless of circumstances or consequences. So that this is a hard one, because a lot of times in business, the the overall goal of profitability tends to become the focal point, and you might be willing to sacrifice some of your your standards to be able to get higher levels of profit. So you might find this happening with let's take an example like farmers. Farmers might know that putting certain types of pesticides on their vegetables and their products can cause problems further down for people who consume their products. But at the end of the day, they're able to produce greater crops, but the quality is not going to be as good. But at the end of the day, if you are led through your value system, and that becomes something that you hold dear to you, then you won't use those chemicals, and you would still know that, okay, I am happy with the type of product I'm giving you, because I know that it's safe for consumption, rather than something that might, because the problem with a lot of these agricultural products is that and pesticides in particular, pesticides and fungicides, is that the impact is not well known in the short term, but it it causes problems in the long term. And therefore, if in the long term you don't care, then you're going to end up hurting people. So, but the problem is whether or not your value structure, your value system is going to allow you to behave in that manner. And this is what the model is saying. You have to be, you have to develop values and attributes that will make you behave in a manner that is um, going to be looking at the best for everybody at all times, regardless of what the circumstances are or the consequences are. And that's something that some leaders lack. We have the Enron. Well, some of you all are going to be looking at models coming up and other things. You all remember the Enron issue in the late 2000s? Anybody? No? Can you think of any business of late that has, well, we could look into the actions of pharmaceutical companies now when it comes to the vaccines, and we could begin to question the values and that they're utilizing to make decisions, because um, there is so much doubt associated with the vaccinations and their effectiveness against the COVID virus. Yet still they are pushing it forward, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of alternative that has been offered. Um, those kind of things. I don't know if you would agree with that, as maybe the pharmaceutical companies are focused more on their monetary outcome, as opposed to what the what the health what's happening from a health perspective. How do you all feel about that? No comments? Nobody have papers.
I think that is an entire conspiracy.
It's a
Honestly,
difficult thing to discuss because yes, you're right.
yeah.
There's a lot of conspiracy theory attached to it. But I mean, given that there's so much doubt that's been exhibited by so many people in societies, and it's not just here; it's all around the world. Is I mean, what can they do to be able to minimize that? And that has happened because people have lost a lot of trust in the pharmaceutical industry because they've lied in the past. And when you've lied in the past, it affects your future relationship with your customers. It's a particular issue in the United States with the black population because in the past the black population has been used as guinea pigs for testing of different types of techniques, vaccines, that kind of stuff, where people were purposely infected with certain things. I don't know if you all might be aware of the Tuscany experiment. Don't know about that one. It's a bit old. It's in the 70s, um, with black servicemen coming back from the war, from Vietnam, being infected with syphilis purposely to see what the long-term effect of syphilis was and that kind of stuff. So you all should check that out. And it's behaviors like that does not bode well for pharmaceutical companies because they in the past
What about what would have taken place with the Spanish flu?
similar similar issues. Is it what just precursor? What you say? What you mean by that?
So based on what I would have, I saw an article once,
Uh,
and what it spoke to was um, the Gates Foundation um, would have been instrumental in coming up with that entire virus, the Spanish flu, and they would have gotten permission to give it to the soldiers who were going off to fight at that time. And the idea behind it, or what was told to them, is that they were going to an area that was infected with a lot of disease and stuff like that.
they inoculated.
And they inoculated them. And when they came back, um, the reason to inoculate the population was that the soldiers were coming back, and based on where they went, they would be coming back with diseases. So they inoculated persons within the population. And I think it was within 2 years, every single person that they inoculated passed away.
Okay. You have to send me a link to that because it sounds a little fishy. Because the when you say the Gates organization, you're talking about Bill Gates.
Not Bill Gates. I think it's either his uncle or his great grandfather or grandfather or someone there. And they said how many years after it's happening again now with COVID,
Okay.
because the foundation is deemed to
Let me
prevent
just check it. Send me a link to that research. Let me check it because I've not heard about that element with the Spanish flu.
Will do.
My problem with the way the vaccine works is that it doesn't really prevent you from getting the disease, which is I am accustomed when in the past you get a vaccine and it prevents you from getting the disease because you've developed your own antibodies. But all this vaccine is doing is really just when you get the disease or you catch it eventually, which is likely to happen. It's supposed to make your recovery easier. I don't know if that's how I perceive a vaccine working, but again, that is
That's it. That's how all vaccines work. Because I'm sure you probably had flu vaccines and stuff. Like all vaccines, you just
yeah, you're right. That's correct because the flu vaccine I always have to get a new one every year.
yeah, you just still get the virus, but I think that's where efficacy comes in.
Uh-huh.
Depending on basically how much it could basically fight off the virus. But I'm not don't quote more on that.
Okay, which may mean that we will need to have new shots in the future.
You're going to have quite a lot of booster shots in the future.
Well, I don't think it'll be boosters as it would be different shots to deal with the new strains. Because of that. Was this somebody coming in or somebody making
No, I think someone is laughing.
Somebody's laughing.
LOL, LOL.
Oh, I'm seeing some new people coming in. I'm seeing Sean Guerrero here. Sancho is here. Not Sancho. Sanchez.
So Laura, you can give me a new name every week.
No, that's not good. So that's it. Besides you two, that's all. Daniel, Campbell, Catherine. Okay. Let's get back to our. The place got lively. What do you mean by the place getting lively, Miss Mirage?
So because Sanchez here all the time, nobody wasn't talking. He just really wanted to communicate with you more.
So, what's your problem?
Nothing, sir.
Set yourself up there. Yeah. All right, let's go to the doing element. The doing of knowing and being means acting. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah? The doing of knowing and being means acting. So if you know something and you become that thing, you start to internalize what that action, then you act upon it. That brings us to the doing. Character and knowledge are not enough in facilitating change in leadership process. The doing attempts to produce the results that accomplishes the vision, the change, or influence the others to act. So the idea of doing means to take the first two elements, the knowing and being, and then acting upon it. And that's important. But again, of course, it has to be based upon, high ethical values and good competencies with your skills and your knowledge base in terms of it. All right. Now, sometimes leaders fail to act because of indecision or due to fixation on perfection. And this is something that a lot of leaders tend to suffer from. And this shows a lack of confidence in the sense that what they're afraid of is failure. And if a leader is afraid of failure, then it doesn't bode well for an organization, because the only way you're going to learn in some instances is to fail at some point. All right. So a leader who sets a standard of zero defects, no mistakes, is also saying don't take chances. And that's something that a lot of leaders suffer from, because unfortunately some leaders have to take responsibility when mistakes take place. And not unfortunately, all leaders have to take responsibility. And therefore, as a result, there's a fixation on getting it right the first time. And I don't know how many of you all have ever gotten anything right the first time you've ever tried it. I think that's a fallacy of perfection. And that causes sometimes organizations to get stuck without moving. And I've actually experienced that type of leadership in the past, where we could not do things until everything was done perfectly. Every T was crossed, every I was dotted, all things were in place. And it meant that for a long period of time, you just simply did nothing but work and work at getting this thing right. But you actually did nothing. You just did a lot of planning and dry runs and no chance. And that actually can stifle an organization. And it's something that we have to pay attention to as leaders, that you don't get caught up in this don't take chances, because without taking chances, you're not going to learn, because as you can see here, learning is an outcome of the knowing, being, doing. If you don't try something and fail, then there's no way for you to learn whether or not what you're doing is working or not. And that's part of the problem of leading. Leading has to be one of those things that you know you're going to be taking chances, and therefore there's a great deal of risk involved. And that's why, I mean, you try to minimize the cost factors, and here we're talking about human cost factors. But if you don't try to do certain things, then you're not going to be able to actually execute in the long run. All right, being attuned to new learning is changing your attitude and behavior towards um, to yourself in general, and that's important. Leaders promote learning in at least three ways: through their own learning, which is by example, by helping others to learn, by creating opportunities for other people in your organization to learn, and by shaping and contributing to a culture that promotes learning. And having a system of perfection doesn't promote learning. It and that's something that we had a situation we had a situation in an organization where the leaders were okay with showing their own learning and saying, okay, I did some research and try this, and then well, I want to helping others think, but they were uneasy with this last one because when people tried things, they were highly criticized and what's the word I want to use? Basically, used to sit down in meetings and get buff for doing it, and that does not promote a culture of learning. And because part of the learning process is to make mistakes, so we used to have there was a so it crippled the organization because regardless of what you learned, you still have to kind of try things to see if it works, and that was a problem with. I remember having that situation in teaching practice because I like to experiment in classes. So I remember trying different techniques in class, and then when I would be in meetings with people, the heads of department and sometimes section chairs and stuff like that will say, "Well, why are you doing that? You're not supposed to be doing that." I said, "Well, I'm trying to experiment with this and that." So and then they would start to rake you over the coals and say, "No, you can't be doing that, and we have to be doing the same thing in all the classes and that." So well, you can't be experimenting with your teaching techniques and teaching methodology if you're not going to make changes and try things differently in your own classes. That way you could learn this works, this doesn't work, and then you try something else, try something different. But if you have a situation where you're not encouraging this type of learning, this culture of learning, then regardless of how much learning the individuals do that on their own and through the assistance of the organization is not going to contribute to change because that culture of attempting to do things doesn't exist in the organization. Don't know if any of you all ever had that. There's one way to do things and it's my way. That's basically it. And if you make a mistake, well then crap will smoke your pipe. That's basically how the system works. So therein is something that we want to pay attention to, not promoting in organizations that you get into. All right. So here we're talking about now relational leadership is purposeful. So we come back to the beginning of the thing. The purpose of your organization, the purpose of your whole leadership thrust. So being purposeful means having a commitment to a goal or activity. So we know about that. So there's a goal or objective that we're trying to get done or accomplish. It is the ability to collaborate and to find common ground with others to facilitate that objective, all right, which obviously is going to be change. Creating that change means working hard with others towards resolving differences among participants, finding common direction, and building a shared vision to improve the organization or enhance others. So, again, it's all about working together, but working together with the goal in mind of what you're trying to get done. So it's that defines the context of what you're going to be doing, and that's in purpose. The purpose is it allows focus. If you have no focus, then all you're doing is kind of just waffling around the place, and you're not sure why you're doing what you're doing. But if you have a goal of focus, that's going to be important. How we arrive at that purpose is going to be a different thing too. It's important that all group members be able to articulate that purpose and use it as a driving force. Now, how do you get other people to share in your vision and your purpose and your goals? And that becomes a problem or essential element of leadership because you might come into an organization where, as it says here, the conventional paradigm often asserts that the positional leader, the person in charge of the organization, must have a clear vision of where we want to go. Research has indicated, however, that there are two types of visionary activities that take place, which is personalized vision and socialized vision. So what is socialized? This is the one we tend to meet a lot in organization. It refers to a person, usually the person with legitimate authority in the organization, announcing a dream or plan and therefore imposing that on others. Now they're going to do that, they don't necessarily impose it on you, but of course they're going to do things to convince you this is the right way to go, yada yada yada. Especially with business activities, their goals would be tend to be in terms of production, output, and profits. So participants seem to have little choice and must adopt the vision, because that's the nature of the organization. You either agree with us and move with us, or you get left behind. All right, which of course results in varying degrees of personal ownership and commitment. So it means that some people might stay in your organization who don't really share your view or your vision, but they're going to stay there because they may simply be unable to or unwilling to go and look for a new organization to work in, because they put in so much time, especially when you have people who have been working in organizations fairly long, and they have institutional awareness and institutional knowledge, which become critical for your organization to move forward, but they don't buy into your personalized vision. So that brings us to the other one, socialized vision. And that is building a vision from among group members, recognizing that people support what they help to create. And this makes sense. So if you go into an organization and rather than go with your own vision, but start with your vision and then socialize your vision, meaning that you get other people to look at what you are proposing and begin to add, well, yours is good, but then maybe we could try to do this as well, or alongside this, or maybe we can look a little further down the road. Because again, here you're using that whole thing about working smarter, collectively smarter, because all of us are smarter than just one of us. So your vision can't only be the only vision that guides and drives the organization and gives it purpose, because then if it's your vision only, then nobody else is going to have the kind of motivation and commitment to that vision that you might want everybody to have. So sharing the vision doesn't mean that each person must create and possess a vision, but that each person must be involved in the process of building that vision with everybody in the organization. And that's a really important thing. It's especially when you're jumping into an organization, when you're new, because you really have to understand what the vision of the organization is, and keep on doing exercises to be able to do that. How many of you all here in your organizations where you work engage in vision and mission statement writing for your organizations? Ever so often, organizations need to renew that. It's kind of
Yes, I actually, as you said that, I remember that actually helped with. I'm not sure if we was basically working on either a new mission or a new vision for our company recently. I'm not sure if it actually changed yet, but my boss was kind of discussing it with me, saying how this would sound, etc., etc.
Right. That's part of the process of getting a socialized vision as opposed to a personalized vision. But it generally starts with the organization leadership or executive leadership, getting other people, starting with some start point, and then throwing it out to the wider community of organization or other individuals to get what they understand from it. It's a lot more work than it is to develop your own vision and mission. But again, especially in very large complex organizations, getting a shared vision is going to be problematic to generate, because it's taking time. It will take a lot of time to develop it. That makes sense? But at the end of the day, if you have that shared vision, then you have more people pulling towards getting that vision accomplished, and you're not just forcing people to agree to your position in the organization or the thing. And that's really going to do, because as they say here, Effective leaders don't just impose their vision on others, they recruit others to a shared vision, especially in our digital age where when power tends to coalesce around ideas, not positions. Leadership is a partner, not a sinecure. What is that?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, the organization is heading in a direction that it was not meant to,
Uh-huh.
and the owners would have hired someone to change that vision around, but the person has a time frame in which to do it.
Right, that happens. You try to put together a realistic time frame. Though, that's not a problem. But the owners are missing out on an opportunity to get other people involved. Why? Okay, so I can understand hiring somebody from outside, but that person who's coming in should have engaged in more of a socialized vision approach. Getting people in the organization who currently work to help develop that shared vision moving forward. If that person understood that particular thing, but if, however, they were given a very ridiculous time frame to work under, then it would not lend itself to that. It means that the leaders in that organization, which is the owners in this case, they're looking for a very quick turnaround. Whereas the truth of the matter may be that the situation that presents itself doesn't allow for that kind of fast turnaround. It might take more time.
Right.
Um, that's dangerous, and especially when you're bringing a third party from outside who has little institutional knowledge, has a mandate to reach in a specific time frame. Um, that's it. It would have been better for them to put a committee together from various people in different departments in the organization.
Within the organization.
To either work with an expert, because what they're bringing in there is a change management expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if that change manager expert really knows their stuff, what they're really trying to tackle there is something called transformational leadership. And organizational transformation is probably one of the most difficult things to do because people become very entrenched in doing things in a particular manner, and therefore getting them to change their behavior, to change their mindset, is something that you have to start from ground up, because if you don't get that groundswell, it's not going to happen, despite whether or not this person puts together a fantastic vision to move forward. If nobody agrees with it, nobody will with it. You understand?
Understood.
Yeah. So
But the sad thing is that is the reality with a lot of small businesses within our country.
yes, it is, and that's because a lot of them lack the background in leadership studies, or leadership development, I should say, to understand the problem that they're facing with this particular thing. I mean, by the time you finish this course, you might be better suited to lead the organization through the change, but using a more relational approach. But what approach are they using now? Are they writing or generating goals and objectives independent to the organization and the people who work in it?
Well, it's a scenario that I was privy to in the past, not present.
Right, but I mean, when they were doing what they were doing, is it that
They did engage assistance from within,
Uh-huh.
but still, the person they hired had the ultimate say.
And that person, when they were finished, what they were going to do? Work with the company, or they were going to move on to somebody else?
They were going to literally take over and manage from henceforth.
Wow, well then if that person was going to be managing after the fact, then they should have used a more inclusive methodology of developing that goal. Because what has been the end result after the fact now?
The company stayed up and running for could have been about 10 or 15 years, and then after it closed down.
Right, because it failed to change more. Because 10 or 15 years is a good runner, but after 10 years, you need to go back and revisit that whole thing again. You have to remember that change is the most constant thing in life. If you don't change, you will not survive. But then again, maybe there was no impetus from the ownership to make that change again, because it cost a lot in the first time. Possibly, we'll see. Yes. All right. So let's look at this. Being purposeful within a group, with a group vision, sorry, that includes a positive change effort, helps set priorities and make decisions congruent with that dream. Vision animates, inspires, and transforms purpose into action. So this is the power of vision. If you have a shared vision, people become enthusiastic participants in transformation of the organization or into getting that change done. I mean, we have a meeting taking place right now. I think I've seen a lot of memes coming out of it already. In where did in Ireland, I think it is. The climate change meeting or the carbon emissions meeting.
And our Prime Minister is in attendance.
Yeah, because he's part of that mandate as well as a leader of I think he has a role within CARICOM and within for our country as well. Heads of states have to be around. There's a lot of I don't think they lack a very unified vision. They tried getting this guy Attenborough to speak to them, I think, to maybe clarify, what's happening and why we need to do what we're doing. But for some reason, there doesn't seem to be a unifying vision there across the board. At least it's not shared by everybody, because I mean, the largest carbon generator, China, was absent. They didn't bother to come to the meeting. And India made some sort of promises there that by 2050 they would make some changes, but the changes that are required, need to possibly be,
And this is because a lot of the countries who are very high carbon emitters, if they were to restructure their operations, they are thinking they're going to lose a lot.
Yeah, and that's because of their commitment and fixation with fossil fuel systems. So, I mean, if you think about it from our own perspective here in Trinidad, everything that we do generates utilizes power. And if our power is generated by utilizing fossil fuels, then we are part of the problem. So we have to think about everything we do that contributes to power consumption, and therefore that power consumption leads to carbon emissions. Not just, I mean, the smaller things, but the larger things. I mean, consider the size of your TNTech bill, how much electricity you consume. That's part and parcel of that whole situation. So the problem with it is that how do you go about generating a situation where you say, okay, we need power, but the way in which we generate that power has to shift. So we need to move away from fossil fuels and into more renewable energies. But you have to put policies in place to do so. And you have to get commitment from people in and around you in the country to be able to do so. But the problem that you have is that the levels of development throughout the world are so varied that some countries who are now catching up, utilizing the older technologies, they're going to be placed in a pressure situation where they have to adopt new technologies almost immediately. Whereas those places that have utilized fossil fuels for a very long time to have developed their economies, Europe, the United States, and China, and all those large places, Russia, and so on, they are therefore saying it's sort of like passing the buck on to these new countries coming up, these newly developed countries, and saying that they have. So there's a problem with equity as well when you come across that. Something that you all probably need to go look into because of the global warming situation that's taking place. All right. So a vision to be motivational must be a source of self-esteem and common purpose. So, how many of you all know the vision of COSTAT? Vision and mission statement of COSTAT. Don't? Nobody knows?
The trouble I've seen.
The what?
NASA, I don't know.
The trouble you've seen?
I know it's something along the lines of being dynamic, innovative, something.
Dynamics.
To be a student-centered, dynamic, and innovative world-class multi-campus college, promoting excellence in teaching and learning,
Uh-huh.
See, I got 90%.
serving diverse communities and producing lifelong learners who
Uh-huh.
can come
Who can compete?
globally.
All right, there we go.
So she Google
Thank
that.
God for Google.
Thank God for Google. Thank God for Google, yeah. All right. But it's right, it's here, on the website. You can look at it here. The problem
It
that
might be under the about us.
well, I was looking there and seeing let's see.
You try who we are.
I found the mission statement, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, where did you find it?
And vision.
It's on the site. To be the primary educational institution in providing high quality, affordable, and accessible educational programs, serving the needs of business, industry, and the diverse campus communities, and facilitating the personal and professional development of its students, faculty, and staff. So
Right.
that is on the institutional profile.
Yeah,
Pretty
that's-
much when you Google it and you click on that link, yeah, right there.
Right there in institutional profile. Seeing it? And then we had well, this is going back in some of the history of how we started here as well. Milestones and achievements, the transformational situation in National Community College, because that's where we started with the National Community College. But to be student-centered, dynamic, that's the vision. So what's the difference between vision and mission? And there's a group that's going to be dealing with this in a lot more detail. But the important element here is, what is the importance of this? The importance of developing a vision and mission statement is going to be critical, because that vision and mission statement, or the vision in particular, has to drive a lot of behavior and behavioral changes. All right. If you don't get this right, and you don't get buy-in, and you don't get people to commit to it, then you're not going to get anything done. All right. And unfortunately, sometimes, despite what you do, you're going to lose people along the way. And that's an unfortunate thing. And the person who deals with, the group that deals with managing change or change management will deal with that as well. It's not what vision is, it's what vision does. That is something that is so true. It, regardless of what the vision is, that is not what the impact, how we're going to feel the impact is. What does that vision do to the people involved in the organization, and how we behave as a relation of that vision, or in relation to that vision. There was a tagline that COSTAT used to use at one point in time. Anybody familiar with that? A shortened version to the other one that we had. No? You don't know that one?
I'm sorry, sir, what's the question?
There was a tagline that was utilized by the college at one point in time. They sort of played it down now. But I think it had to do here. Transforming the nation one student at a time.
Yes, sir. I hear what I want to hear, sir.
Yeah. In fact, we had, at one point in time, we had gotten these little badges, these gold-plated badges, lapel badges that we used to. We had a new shield that the college had developed. That was under a different president. And what we ended up doing was, he started to call us transformers, because that was our responsibility to transform the world, the country, the nation, one student at a time. That was the he wanted something that would have been. He liked these vision and mission statements, but he found that they were a bit long to remember. So he wanted a more catchy something to work with, and he developed that. And I thought it was quite nice. And then he went about marketing it and got these pins that people would get and pin on them, and they'd be known as Costa Transformers, and then got students involved with the whole transformational process, because the other elements that we were trying to deal with was transforming students' view of what student life was all about. So that was another element that came up as well with that. All right. So again, you understand the purposefulness of leadership and the vision and its function in the organization. All right. So again, the whole concept is vision will pull people together or it will drive them apart. And the change process can have various motives associated with them. Relational leadership supports positive change. That is change that would improve the human condition and does not intentionally harm others. That's an important element here, because remember, you have to keep on remembering the ethical aspect of the decision making and the choices that we make. So when you're working for change, you're working for positive change. Of course, that means that you gotta be careful with this one here. You see where it says when facilitating positive change process, the means justifies the ends, which is the way in which you make the change has to justify it. That's a kind of dangerous statement, because that means you could kind of cheat and get things done. That's not what they're trying to say. I mean, you have to be ethical all the way through the process of making the change. So we don't shortchange people along the way and mistreat people along the way. Doesn't mean that people won't get hurt. Huh? They may get hurt, but it wouldn't be intentionally hurt by the change that's going on. So you can see all these just speak to the same commonality of implementing change and using that function of positive change to drive what is going on in the organization. The main thing that they're looking at is that the group that you're working with, the organization, is trying to make a difference, and that is the driving power behind the entire organization. Now, that change that they're trying to make is generally going to be connected with wider values in society and values in the world around them, or at least among the stakeholders that invest or are affected directly by your organization. Those are the things that you want to be paying attention to now. And it's all well and good when we look at certain things. We would like our purpose in life to matter. And I'm not sure that happens for everybody. I don't know if where you work you feel a sense of accomplishment and purpose that is of a wider application in the world around you. Do you feel satisfied with the job that you do? Is it contributing to the development of the country, to development of people? Is your work of noble worth? That's something that some people would love for their jobs to be, of noble worth. And I think we can find noble worth in everything we do. It's just a matter of how you go about finding that noble worth of the things that we're doing from a day-to-day perspective. I don't know if you ever came across the parable of coming across three guys building a wall. You ever heard about this one?
Maybe.
So this guy came across a construction site. So he spoke to the first worker and he asked the worker what was he doing, and he said, "I'm laying bricks." When he spoke to the second worker, the worker said, "I'm putting up a wall." And when he spoke to the third person, and they were all doing the same thing, putting on bricks, We spoke to the third person. He said, I'm building a cathedral. So each one of them speaks to a different perception and mindset as to how vision impacts upon them, because it means that the person who is looking at this that they're doing at this point in time is part of a larger process of building a cathedral. It means that he's looking at the goal or the vision in the long run. The person who's just looking like he's putting up a wall is kind of like a medium term person. They could only see the short run of what they're doing. And the first person, they can only see what's directly in front of them. They're very myopic in their view. And those are the types of individuals you're going to meet in organizations all the time, because not everybody is going to be like the third person who buys in and commits to the vision and purpose of your organization. So you're going to have those people who are just there for the bear kind of thing. All right. So, but again, the organization, what you're hoping to do is to generate such furor about your purpose in life, or purpose of being, that you're going to have this situation take place here, where that purpose, that difference that you're trying to make, is going to be central driving force in the organization. And of course, it's what your leadership is going to be pushing around. So some situations are profoundly hard to change. Now, why are certain situations hard to change? Well, one of the things is because we get accustomed to doing things. All right. And change theory, I've talked about, there's a group that's going to be looking at change theory, will only happen. Change often begins when something unfreezes a situation. So we get frozen, basically. The cycle is often presented as unfreezing, changing, and then refreezing. The unfreezing that they talk about here is caused by a trigger event. So only when something goes wrong, then we realize we have to change. People pay attention to the problem and they focus on what they have to do to fix the problem, and then that's when they'll make the change. But as soon as they've made the change and they think they've solved the problem, they freeze the situation back again. So you go from a frozen state to liquid state to frozen state again. You all understand this whole thing about a trigger event, right? So that could be some sort of crisis that has come on that caused an organization to want to make a change. So in our case here, if we use the pandemic here is a trigger event. It caused us to unfreeze a lot of systems that operated in our societies to make a change to treating with the circumstances. Take, for example, in terms of the online classes. The trigger event was the pandemic. We had already started moving on to an online environment to broaden the access to people. But that trigger event caused us to have to move faster into that situation, whereas we were kind of sort of moving slowly into the online process. It forced us to have to move faster. And that happened in a lot of organizations where that pandemic or the pandemic is causing changes necessary to take place in organizations to be able to cope with that change. And that is a very important thing. Unfreezing may also occur when external policies change. We saw that as when there are new laws, for example. Can anybody think of any laws that may have caused organizations to have to change their behaviors? Any of you might have experienced it.
Well, I can't really think of any locally, but I know that for YouTube, some people, I can't remember the organization, pull up on them for how they advertise to children. So if anybody noticed like any big drastic changes towards how YouTube serve their content to children and advertisements by extension,
because when I load content onto my YouTube channel, I usually indicate that it's not for children. It actually limits the capacity of it reaching certain people, and can be taken down if they find it what's the word? if there are copyright infringements, and if there are inappropriate comments being made. Those are things that you get taken off for.
Yeah, exactly. So that was nothing that well, the copyright stuff was over there before, but they never used to ask if this content was made for kids before.
Now they have to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now they have to. Yeah. Because the way in which a lot of content is shaped, it's of adult nature, and therefore there's an age restriction to certain elements that's going on with it. So that way you wouldn't put particular types of ads that are geared towards children. So the whole point is, if you have stuff that is geared towards children, then there's a likelihood that you'll see more ad work coming into it. And that actually helps you to earn income from YouTube, which that monetization element is something else. But locally, one of the things that I can think of is think about the safe zones that the government wants to set up. That has been enacted right now. How is that going to cause change?
I think one aspect of it is that they could only have a certain amount of people within their facility. So, like half of the regular amount is all that they can take in at one point in time.
And those people have to be vaccinated, correct?
I think,
Yes, fully
Yeah.
vaccinated.
yes, I
Yes,
think so.
Evidence of vaccination. They don't walk around with your vaccination card until there's some sort of alternative that can be utilized. That's something that's a bit tricky. But the process of unfreezing allows us to be able to address things that may not have been of interest in the past. Now, one of the things that I wanted to draw your attention to was a couple of years ago, the FIU had made decisions based upon the size of deposits into the bank for laundering purposes. So that anything over $10,000, you had to do source of income and that type of stuff. And that has actually led to a particular type of activity taking place where people would make sure that they are depositing in sort of like undocumented income in packets of less than $10,000. You all familiar with that? $10,000 mark for money laundering activities? Ever been affected by it?
Heard about it. Wish I was affected by it.
If you ever get a deposit coming into your bank beyond $10,000, your bank will contact you for evidence of where that's coming from and why you're getting this amount of money. This is one of the reasons why you have to get a tax clearance when you're getting certain things put into your money transferred. For example, if you're getting let's say you finish a
Source of
contract,
funds.
you have to do source of funds. If you're doing a gratuity payment, like if you finish a contract, and generally when you complete contracts, you get a gratuity at the end of the contract period. That usually tends to be a fairly large amount of money, and therefore you'd have to have a source of funds statement, and you'd also have to do, especially those that are coming from the government, you would also have to have a tax clearance done as well, so that you don't have no encumbrances on it.
So I could just add one thing to your point.
Yeah.
Also, traveling between Trinidad and Tobago, you cannot travel with excess of 20,000 TT. So you can travel with 19,000, but you can't travel with 20,000 plus.
Right, that's true. What about that one? That's true for travel. That's kind of irrelevant already because you can. But anyway, they're talking about cash. You can't move with more than that.
Yeah,
In fact,
yeah.
even moving with cash in other countries is also something that they look at as you have to be you have to have certain things in place to be able to move cash around that way as well, and that has a lot to do with drugs and the way in which the drug cartels move money around as well. So it's something that well, not only drugs but any sort of criminal activity that generates a lot of revenue, cash revenue, that has to be laundered by the organization. So those are things that might cause unfreezing in organization. But what might cause unfreezing in your own personal life? Can you think of anything that will happen that will cause you to make personal changes? Anybody? Illness is one. Death is another. Loss.
Divorce.
Well, yeah, the divorce is a form of loss. Yes, those kind of things would.
It could be a gain for some people.
Sorry, what's that?
I said it could be a gain for some people.
It could be a game.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might have to emphasize that because I was thinking now. I want to know how my life could change.
Say that again. Sorry.
I said they might have to emphasize that because I play games. I want to know how it could affect me.
I was kind of wondering you said divorce was a game, or
Oh, Mesa?
yeah, I think it's a game.
Oh no, I said it is positive for some people. It's a gain, not game. Sorry.
A game.
Oh, again.
A
I
gain.
thought it was a game. Okay, all right, sorry. The enunciation was a little off there. All right. Yeah, it depends on how you look at it. It could be a gain as opposed to a loss, because the change could be a positive change, but it's still going to be, it's going to start by being a loss, because you're changing something very radically from what it was before. So those are things that could unfreeze a situation. All right. So now,
I think most unforeseen circumstances.
yeah, you could have accidents that have happened too. Yeah, an accident or an incident. It doesn't have to necessarily be an accident, but an incident can take place that could cause you to have to think. And this is something that you want to be paying attention to. Even if after you've made a change, it would be an error to refreeze the situation. Instead, what this writer speaks about is best to consider the outcome to be slush, so that the solution is seen not as final but as permeable and open to redress easily. So what they're trying to say is don't go on nail things down and cast it in cement and freeze it. Let it be a little more fluid so that if there are further changes to be made, they're less traumatic to be made. All right. Automatically open to review, regular evaluation, and flexibility. So the idea is when you invest in change, you need to make sure that the change doesn't get whatever change that is made initially doesn't become cemented again or frozen again, because you'd have to go through the whole process of unfreezing everything again to go on, and that is a lengthy, time-consuming method of getting things done. That's something that a lot of
So someone put in the chat, don't burn the bridges that you cross.
well, yeah, that makes sense, because you may need to track back as well as move forward. Yeah, that makes sense. That's something that we could look at as well. But when you're making changes for the better, sometimes it means not going back where you were before. This is something especially you could treat with relationships. We have a tendency sometimes when we break up with people, we tend to go back and break up and then go back and honestly, sometimes the whole situation requires that you break up and stay broken up, because whatever it is in that relationship that you had with that person or individual is not working. That's why you keep on coming to the stage where you all are unhappy together. So rather than being unhappy together, be happy alone. That might be better across the board. I don't know how much you'll feel like that, but one of the problems with that is people are deathly afraid of being alone. and would prefer to be with somebody but unhappy. And that's a sad state to be in, really and truly. Because eventually, you never know, you might be able to meet somebody who works better with you. You never know.
Well, so just in learning the piece that I'm doing for our presentation next week, I think understanding yourself is a major part of any relationship, because if you don't really understand yourself, you're not going to know who fits you best.
And then there are parts of you that you're never going to know until you get involved with somebody, because you behave differently with others.
Yeah.
And you not even be aware, because prior to being with somebody and you're kind of accustomed to doing things on your own kind of stuff, you may not be aware of certain behaviors until you have that person with you to kind of say, why you do that? Why do you do
Yeah,
that?
because you're basically going to feel like you have a lot of failed relationships, but maybe it's not that. It's just that you need to focus on something else first before you jump into a relationship.
Yeah. What I found though in terms of practice is that we have a tendency to be making the same mistakes all the time. We tend to do the same things over and over again, the same way in relationships without realizing it. And we end up with the same result. But it's sort of like all you're doing is changing the individuals involved. And that necessarily may not be working. You really have to kind of reflect on yourself and get to understand who you are as a person and realize, okay, these are things that I can't do or shouldn't be doing and that kind of stuff. So those are things that you might want to apply to yourself when you're thinking about relationships. Think about who you are and why you are behaving the way you do, and are those things desirable in relationships to as a thing, or is there a need for you to change that behavior or modify that behavior? All right. This is the classic model here from Lewin, describing the change process of moving from the present state through a transitional state to the desired state. It still works, that definition still works, but the relational model speaks to us really developing a more fluidity in the final process, because if you become too fixed, when it's time to make another change, you're going to be back at the first stage, and you're never going to be able to, or you're going to be taking too long to make the necessary changes. This is something that happens with organizations that have been around for a long time and they've gotten very large. They're very, very difficult to change. Small organizations tend to be less rigid and they're able to make fast changes very quickly. But large organizations that have existed for long periods of time tend to get stuck in that old behavioral pattern, which is one of the things that new organizations should really be looking at, that they're more flexible and fluid. And that fluidity is a strength for the organization. Somebody wanted to say something? All right. The process obviously is one that I said before, this is time consuming, because when you have change taking place in groups that are newly formed, then that's easier, because everybody's now coming together and you are coming to grips with each other and dealing with the interpersonal issues that may arise, but you're developing that vision together and you're working towards it. That's the freshness of a new relationship. Let's put it that way. But when you are in a long-term relationship, the process of making change becomes more difficult because of the amount of baggage that comes with it, and that's something that creates problems. Um, um, and can create some problems for long-term change that's taking place. That's one of the reasons why change is a kind of time-consuming process, especially in organizations. But if you think about it from your own personal point of view, permanent changes to your behavioral patterns is something that's going to take you a little bit of time to be able to get sorted out. Ongoing groups creates more problems. So because more has been established, new participants have to determine whether or not they can connect with that particular vision and feel that they can help to shape it. So that requires that the persons in an organization sort of like bring people on board, share the group vision, and indoctrinate them into that vision of the organization. If you don't do that indoctrination, they're gonna not necessarily feel that they're doing anything that makes any linkage, and they might end up having some very a difficult time to be able to draw together to build something together with the organization, and they may not stay very long if they don't feel that sense of belonging in a group. That's an important element that we have to look at in all organizations. When new people come into organizations, it's important that the organization spend some time mentoring the individual and bringing them on board and sharing the vision. So it's not something that you stop doing. All right. So relational leadership means that we are inclusive. Being inclusive means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, and aspects of individuality, such as sex or culture, that add multiple perspectives to a group's activity. So this is the challenge of being inclusive in relational leadership model. You have to understand and value. Now, that's difficult when you're dealing with things that might be against what you think or have values towards. So there is a big challenge there, and you actually have to engage with that diversity to find solutions, to find a way through, and not half-heartedly. You have to do this wholeheartedly, and you have to get engaged with those individuals that would engender those different approaches and diversities that you may have problems with. So you have to kind of get beyond that inclusiveness. Understanding how different groups or individuals approach issues from different perspectives, frames, maintaining the attitude that respects the differences, values equity and involvement. So these are some of the guidelines that they keep on talking about of being inclusive. It means thinking of networks and webs of connections instead of seeing issues or problems as isolated and discrete. So that when you're working with other people, you're looking at opportunities to bond and connect rather than them as a problem. That group, them, this us and them games we have to kind of try and reduce, because as a leader you have to actually show that everybody is valued. There's no element of the organization that is undervalued or differently valued, that everybody's contribution is important. Where I see this happening a lot, this was something I noticed in my organization for a while, is that there were a lot of people who treated cleaners in the organization very, very disrespectfully. They wouldn't want them touching their personal belongings, and they don't sit with them when we eat lunch and stuff like that. There was this kind of cliquism that was going on, and I always found it as being problematic. That that really spoke a lot to your willingness to be inclusive and understanding of people around you. And it was a horrible thing to see some people react or respond to people who probably have the most dangerous job in the organization, who without their work or their effort, the organization will suffer, and your comfort will suffer, and yet still you treat them in that manner. That was really, really horrible.
So I find that quite odd, because in secondary school, I and everyone around me, we had such good relationships with the cleaners. And I don't know if it's the same type of organizational structure with this example, but we had a lot of respect for the cleaning staff in our school. So I find it really odd that this happens in structured organizations. That's a shame.
Well, it happens a lot in structured organizations where qualifications become a very key thing, and it has nothing to do with qualification. To me, it had to do with people's brought up, see, that you treat everybody with respect. And there, I remember having, seeing some, and I have to see some other lecturers just scorning people like that. I remember going to an event that we had together, um, and sitting at a table. We were doing a Christmas event, I think it was, something along those lines. And I ended up sitting at this table with a group of individuals. Well, they're from the thing. I don't really like with them, but I was sitting with them, and among the people there, I was trying to find out, well, who was here. And this one was a cleaner, and that one was what I think was a long service award. So they were grouping everybody by the years that we were thing. And there was somebody who came with me, another lecturer, I think it was, or administrator, and they decided they didn't want to sit on the table, they wanted to go. And the people who were seated at the desk, the cleaners and stuff, felt really bad. And they turned to me and asked me, if you want to go, you could go, I said, no, I'm sitting here with you guys. I mean, there's nothing wrong with sitting with you guys. And and what they said was that this person in particular always treated humans in that manner. And it was unfortunate because the hard part about it was that that person was a senior management person. And it was really weird to see them behave in that manner. And of course it would do what? It would signal something very negative to the organization in relation to that, and more so about the individual.
So, sir, right there, you brought up an issue that happens a lot of time when you're trying to hire persons. Based on what you would have mentioned earlier, hiring persons that fit the culture and the vision for which you would like to foster within your organization.
Uh-huh.
And when you said it, a thought came to my mind. Even in an interview, people are going to put their best face and foot forward.
Mhm.
But it's only after they're hired and some time has passed is when you really see the the beast or the real human behind the person.
Yep. And
You
that's
know,
one of the
so
reasons why you tend to have um, probationary period in most
So if
organizations.
I want to feel like I
probationary
was
period,
nice, yeah, I could be on my best behavior for 3 months.
or even 6 months in some cases.
That's true, I would say, but eventually it begins to leak out. Because, and then it's just a matter of whether or not that person is going to survive in the organization, because eventually that person is going to be probably left alone by other people who feel like, because I know I felt very uncomfortable around that person afterwards because their
So,
behavior was,
question, sir,
Yeah,
is
yes,
that person still with the organization?
if they were,
Is that person still with the organization?
to be honest with you, I don't think so,
Okay.
but
oh, because
part of the problem with that is that the individual I'm talking about was politically connected. So they got into the organization not through the normal routes, but because of political connectivity. So, and that's part of the problem that breaks down leadership models and that kind of stuff. When you have people gaining positions in organizations outside of the ethical standards that you're trying to set up, you're giving value and favor to individuals because of their political connectivity. And though that might be an asset to you, the behavior that comes up with it is another issue. Somebody wanted to ask a question, one of you guys?
oh no, sir. I was about to say, in respect to how you mentioning that usually a person would be their original behavior would leak out. So I was gonna ask, like, how did this person reach to the senior level with with that kind of
They
attitude?
were
But then,
hired at a senior, they were
yeah,
hired at a senior level.
yeah.
They
So
came
then
in
you
at,
answered it.
yeah, they didn't come up through the ranks kind of thing. They were hired at a senior level, and they came in and they behaved that nonsensical. I found it was juvenile to begin with. honestly. And that person was older than me, so it was like no, they weren't older. I was older than them, and the behavior was really, and it made the whole table feel uncomfortable because of that person's behavior. I was like, why bother to come and sit down next to me in the first place? Because the minute we started introducing ourselves, because in organizations when it gets pretty large, you don't know everybody in the organization, so it's kind of like, so who are you, and yada yada, because everybody on that table is going to get a particular award or award from the organization, and it was because of the number of years of working in the organization, so long service awards. So you understand the problem when you have somebody who's getting a long service award and behaving in that manner towards people who have been in the organization longer than you. It was really ridiculous to see that behavior. And it was indicative of how people started to treat the individual afterwards, actually. Other people started to see that behavior as basically people started to look at that individual as being disingenuous and not trustworthy. And that, of course, affected their leadership in the organization within the smaller ambit of the area that they were working in. All right, so let's move on here. All right, so the whole concept about being inclusive means embracing others despite, listening with empathy, communicating with civility, inclusiveness breeds new relationship or new leadership and creates a positive cycle that sustains the quality of an organization over time. That's important because, I mean, if you are not inclusive, it damages things, as the example I gave you breeds. All right, so the purpose of vision and values of the whole comes to life as each individual member describes and applies them. So the goal is not to overcome the variations and differences among participants, but to build a shared purpose. Leading others to lead themselves is the key to tapping the intelligence, the spirit, the creativity, the commitment, and most of all, the tremendous unique potential of each individual. This is a really good guideline for everybody to follow, because sometimes when we think about driving an organization towards a school, we expect that everybody's going to be driving in the same way we want them to as a leader. But the fact of the matter is that everybody's going to move towards that goal from their own perspective and their own, and your job as a leader is to get them to use that perspective and use their own particular unique methodology of getting things done to arrive at the same place. We don't all travel the same roads to get to the place we are today. All right, we're all in this one
So,
class. Yep.
one question. What would you describe a leader who wants you to do things the way he does or she does in order to get to that goal?
That is a person who's a dictator and is unwilling to listen and view other people's positions or perception as valuable.
Okay.
It's a very selfish individual. And unfortunately, we have lots of leaders like that. You do it the way I tell you to do it, or don't do it at all. Parents tend to do that too, times. All right. And there may be reason for it. I mean, but at the same point in time, you have to give people an opportunity to find their way. Yeah. I mean, you don't have the patience to work in an organization where people are allowed some way to do things in their own style and technique, then you're in the wrong business. That makes sense?
Yeah, understood. So, yeah.
Are you faced in a situation where you are forced to?
I mean, over time, I have different types of supervisors. Yes, I have encountered supervisors like that. This
How
is
long
the
did
only
they
way.
last?
Go ahead.
How long did they last? If they that kind of
They're still around. They're still
yeah,
around.
but how effective are they?
But they're not effective because they don't get support of the junior staff.
And that,
Because it's
that's
basically what you said is a dictatorship and do it my way or no way at all. And people have ideas. I mean, people are intelligent, especially younger persons coming up now, coming into organizations with a lot more education and a lot more level of intellect, you know.
yeah.
So there's a little challenge with the old school and the new school, and they're not adjusting at all.
Well, part of the reason for that is sometimes because they haven't been engaging in their own personal learning and development. They are challenged by people to bring in their techniques. They're not looking at the fact that somebody's going to attempt to do something in a different way, and they can take the opportunity to learn a different approach.
It almost seems like they're afraid sometimes.
Yeah, it's a fair thing, It's a fair thing because it means that if there's a different way to do it, then I'm no longer valuable.
Yeah.
That might be the thinking that the person is going with. I'm no longer valuable if my way is no longer relevant.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I was now about to say, like, a lot of people are afraid of
Change.
learning and change. You know, they don't just see it as growth, they see it as, like, Mr. Bisu said, it's now I'm not valuable. This person is more valuable than me. They know more than I do. So I'm going to be seen by others in that way. And it's
Yep.
kind of unfortunate.
hmm So, and one of the things that we all have to learn too about any organization is that nobody's indispensable. So that's the first thing you have to realize with anyone. If you leave an organization today, somebody else will do your job. Even if they don't do it well, they will still do it, at least from your position or point of view. And unfortunately, you see, a lot of times people become where they work because it might be the only aspect of their life that's really satisfying to them. And as a result of that, they have so much invested in it that it becomes the place where they want the most amount of control because they lack control in other parts of their life.
And I
That,
also think based on their own personal insecurities.
yeah, but because it's based on that. Because they lack control in other aspects of their life, they they own and they can exert this kind of control at the workplace. It gives them a sense of a safe place for them to operate in because nowhere else is safe and they're insecure in all those environments. So they try to make this place because they have been given authority to be able to do that there. In fact, when we start to move a little further down, what time is it? All right, I need to give you all a break because I keep on getting buffed for this, keeping you all going so long. So let's take a break for about 10 minutes and then we'll come back and try and finish up. All right.
Okay, no problem, sir.
I know it's 134.
You can book for something else already, sir.
It looks so, yeah.
You can't escape.